So now we're continuing with our ball bounce. So if you're at this stage, you should have all of your translation keyframes set, the appropriate locations in space, following in the appropriate spacing of time as displayed on our image, right? And then the tension controls at the bottom of each should be, at the bottom of the bounces should be to +1, and at the top of our bounces a negative decimal number to expand the curvature at the top of the arcs. So before we start messing with our E's, which you can find right here, we are going to just play this through so we can see where we're at. And I am just gonna, for my own sake, I want to consider the timing more holistically, because the picture is great. The picture is, frankly, very real, right? It is based on a real ball bounce. I did not actually show you. It's from a YouTube video. So I want to use my principle of animation exaggeration, or to a certain extent, to sort of make this a little slower, because I think it's moving a little too quick. Now, again, when it comes to changing timing, you don't need to do too much, really, a lot of the time. So on this first drop here, it takes 10 frames to get to the bottom. I'm going to make it 11. So it's going to be a little slower getting to the ground, which I already, just that one frame already makes it read a little better. So I'm probably not, I don't need to mess with these ones too much. These first ones, though, might move a little too quick for my interests. So on this first bounce here, so now it's from 11 to 19, I think I'm going to throw a frame on either side of this bounce, and we'll play it out. Adding a frame is done by using the plus sign in the timeline in between keyframes. So the plus sign is the shift, and then the equal sign next to the backspace. You can also add exposure from this little menu here. So anyway, I think that an extra frame makes these first two bounces read a lot better. I was thinking about that after we recorded this on Wednesday or Tuesday. When we do this, Tuesday. So no, we did it Wednesday. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so yeah, a little extra time helps it read a little better. So now that brings us to our acceleration forces. So by default, everything moves at a linear speed, nice, evenly spaced. And you can tell because on the control, these little hash marks denote where the frame is, or the image, the drawing, at any given frame. And you can see that they are currently evenly spaced out from one another, right? So we need to change how that happens. So that is called ease. And there's this little drop-down menu right here that has different curves of acceleration. So you need to sort of understand what this curve is telling you. So the straight line is pretty straightforward. That is basic linear transition speed. So everything is evenly spaced, what we got now. Versus these upward curves. So the upward curves are for slowing your transition, right? So at the beginning, it will be slower into the transitioning into where it goes next, and then it will rapidly accelerate as it approaches the next keyframe. So if you take a look at this portion of my ball bounce right here, so from this point in space down to the ground, if I switch it to this very extreme slow in, you'll see how these keyframes up here start bunching up, or excuse me, these in-betweens start bunching up here, but then they spread out further down the line, the timeline, as it tries to accelerate them, because more change over less time makes things look fast. So if I go ahead and play this now, you can sort of see it looks kind of goofy because I chose the maximum slow in, slow out, so it like rapidly slows down here for a second. So keep that in mind. So yeah, for this one, let's try Oh, and let me show you the opposite before I move forward. So that was the extreme slow. Now with this one, as you'll see, it rapidly accelerates to where it's going and then slows down at when it arrives at the next keyframe. So this is going to look really goofy, right? How the ball slows as it approaches the ground, right? Ball doesn't necessarily do that, right? So that is the difference between, that is what these curves represent, right? So if you look at them, it will rapidly approach at the very end the next keyframe versus starting by rapidly approaching the next keyframe and then slowing as it approaches it. So when we are headed to the ground, we want this to accelerate all the way through until it would be hitting the ground, right? So we want this to be building up speed. So I'm going to use one of these upper curves, and not the most extreme one, as you saw, is a little nuts. So still not super perfect through here. So with this keyframe, we also similarly want to not that one. I'm going to do a little ease at the beginning. Yeah, little ease. So I'm not super worried about this part because, to be honest with you need to manually control the translation speed through here, which I'm not interested in getting into for this assignment. So we're just going to be like, it starts kind of weird. Is what it is. So the main thing is from this keyframe, though, down to the ground, we set the ease to build up speed towards the end. So one of these upper curves, right? I would not suggest this one. Choose the middle one, right? So boom. Then it goes down to the ground. Yay. Now it's on the ground. So when it's bouncing off the ground, it will compress and rebound with its speed. But as it rises up in the arc, it should be slowing down as its acceleration forces equalize with gravity, right? So when it's going up, I want one of these bending up curves, right? So it speeds up into the top of the bounce, then slows as it reaches the top. So I'll choose this middle one again. Seems pretty reasonable. And so now you'll see how it hits the ground and bounces back up. Boom. And then sort of tries to hang in the top of the ball here. The arc, rather. So then we just keep going. We're at the top of the bounce. It's going to the bottom, which means that we need it to accelerate into the ground. So again, I'll pick this middle one. And we'll play it back. Right? So you can see how it's sort of holding, slowing through the top there. Right? So now we're at the ground again at frame 30. And now we'll go ahead and change this. So it's bouncing up again. So I'll use the middle one. And then now we're going back to the ground again. So I'll use the middle of the acceleration one. Boom. And so again, play it through. Looking real good. So we're good there. So now I can just start using the little mini ones, right? I don't need to use too much acceleration forces. Boom. Boom. Oops. Boom. So I'm using the smallest of the ease curves so it doesn't, do anything too nuts. But just the slightest amount of ease to get things going up and down. And then these last ones I'm not even going to worry about, right? So there we go, right? So again, it's just going through, recognizing what it is that our ball should be doing, going towards the next keyframe, right? So I'm at this keyframe. I realize this is going to the ground. It should be accelerating towards the ground, right? So I want to just make sure I pick one of the acceleration curves. Quick thing to note, because I know this comes up a lot, is Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't realize what these buttons did. So this little menu here does not update. Like when I click on a different keyframe, it's not showing me what the ease type is on that keyframe. This menu doesn't update. It just shows you what the last one is that you changed to. So what you really want to look at if you want to check your ease is the control, right? Because it shows you the spacing between those the in-betweens rather. So if the spacing doesn't look right, say like I'm looking at this and the spacing looks like this, and I realize like, wait, there should be more frames up here. That's not right. You just got to go and just replace the ease, right? Just go back and change this graph and it will update the speed. Yes. Oh, very true. Yes. So the onion skin also is a way to track. You can see, right? You can see the clumping of the frames as you go through too. So that's a great indicator because you can see it. You can see how closely it follows our guide, right? Our reference image. So, and even so, keep in mind, like I added some frames to this to make it look a little bit more honest, in my opinion, and still lines up pretty good with the reference. So yeah, the onion skin definitely helps too, for sure. So that is our ease, right? So pardon me for recording this all in one go. So I am going to pause this though. I'm going to pause this. All right, cool. So now we continue. So we're going to now add our squash and stretch. So when it comes to our squash and stretch, here's where things start to become a little bit more esoteric when it comes to working with our pegs, in the sense that our pegs, the controllers, right, for our animation, I like to allow them to control for different things separately, because our pegs, they can contain keyframes for our translation, our rotation, and our scaling, as well as skewing also, but I never use that. But we don't need to have them all on the same peg. It can often be kind of more messy that way. So what I like to do is so this is our main translations, right? This is where our peg goes and at what time it goes there, right? So that's the only thing that this is controlling for. So to make sure that is clear, I'm going to name this my translate peg. So this is where does it go? At what time? Where does it go and at what time and at what speed? I'm going to put that peg, which controls for all of that, inside of a new peg. So I hit the add peg button, the orange one, or you can do the add parent peg from the plus sign. And this one is going to be squash and stretch, because we've already decided where our ball goes and at what time. Now we need to control how it is deforming as it arrives at those locations, right? So I added a new peg. I call it squash and stretch. I'm putting my pivot point right on top of the other one, basically, right? And so on frame 1, I'll just hit the plus KF button right here. We'll add a blank empty keyframe, which is to say it's keeping our scale at 1:1, right? Basic and consistent. So that brings us to what happens down here. Well, what I often see happen on this is that people come down here and I think I did this backwards. Hold on, sorry, I'm in the video. Great. I believe, if I remember correctly, squash and stretch goes here. It goes in between the translate and the ball. Pardon me. Did that backwards. Still same order of operations, just make sure you're selected on the ball drawing so that the peg goes between that and the translate. So, pardon me, so squash stretch. I was like, why did this not just move? Why did the peg not move? Okay, stretch. Okay, let's try this again with the peg in the right spot. Okay, so peg, boom, there, it's on top of it. Okay, so frame 1, empty keyframe. Okay, we're at frame 10. There we go. So, the peg is down here now, as it's supposed to be, because it moved with the translate keyframe. T. So, here, what I see happen is a lot of students remember, okay, yeah, I gotta squash this here, right? But when our ball is in transit, so let me click off of this tool, right? So when our ball's in transit, it should not be squashing because it has not hit the ground yet. The squash is what creates the compression force that makes the ball squish. As it is accelerating towards the ground, the ball should be stretching because it is in an acceleration, not a compression, right? So what actually needs to happen before we squash it, so I undid that, is the frame before it hits the ground would be at when it is at its most accelerated, and therefore when it is at its most stretched. So in order to do so, I'll use my scale tool, and I'm going to scale this out from the center. And so for this step, we're going to kind of make him scoot on his butt, which you'll see in a second what I mean by that. So, but for right now, I stretch the ball out, and here's where your math skills come into play. So if I open up my little squash and stretch channel settings here, the little plus sign, it tells me exactly how much I scaled my ball by. It's telling me down here that I've scaled it by 1.36, right? So this is scaled up basically, or stretched out 33% more than it was originally, 36 to be exact. Now, if you remember from our lovely video from the great and powerful Alan Becker, right, the point for squash and stretch is that it is a replication of physical forces, right? So scale X should be compressing at the same rate that it is stretching. They are equivalent forces, right? So if my stretch is scaling my ball up 36, I should be reducing my scale X, or my scale Y rather, by 36. My scale X should be reduced by the equal and opposite amount, right? So whatever 1 minus 0.36 is, which is 0.64, excuse me, I'm not that bad at math, 0.64, right? And so now we're seeing the ball stretched and squished to maintain the full value of the scale, right? Scale X plus scale Y, if things are done appropriately, should always equal positive 2, right? Because you're scaling something either wider and therefore shorter, or longer but therefore narrower, right? So that's me through the frame before it hits the ground on the squash and stretch peg, right? It's just squishing. And then this is where the scoot on the butt part comes in. Rotate it so that the ball is angled once it's stretched with the line of acceleration, right? As it's accelerating into the ground, make sure the ball is stretched appropriately to align with that force, right? When we go back to the ground, the ball does not need to be rotated. So this can go back to, you can just literally type 0 back in. Like, this is one of those things where as we get more handy with doing some of the stuff in the channels, it's like this really, the rotation should be just 0, right? It should go back to normal. So here though, at the ground, we need to keep in mind a couple of things. So one, basically we should be maintaining when the ball hits the ground. This is where acceleration will be lost on the rebound, but when it hits the ground, it is compressing the force at which it was moving. So what do you think we should make these values? I'll give you a hint. The numbers are on the screen. Anyone want to sound really smart on the video? What do you think these values are at the next frame? If it's at its most accelerated, and it's got to squish all of that acceleration, it's the opposite, right? So, on the frame where it's accelerated, we said that the scale y, because it's stretched out, is 1.36. So when it hits the ground, it should be compressing 1.36, the same amount, right? So it's compressing and squishing. Now, again, the scale must go to the opposite, right? So now the scale y should go to the smaller number, the 0.64, because it's, again, compressing that energy, right? Boom, 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 boom. It's just hitting the ground. Crazy. So, of course, you'll notice, hey, wait a minute, it's not touching the ground anymore. Yeah, no, that's true. So this is where we just take a little pop back up to our translate peg and say, oh, hey, little buddy, make sure you touch the ground. So just don't forget to go back and fix. You can do this step all at the end if it doesn't bother you, but I just like to do it as I'm going along. So I've done my squash and stretch, and this is the great part about this. You folks can animate a little bit more technically. There's no need to eyeball it, right? You can eyeball the first stretch, but after that, you can do it by numbers, right? So we inverted these numbers, we just typed them in. So 1.36, 0.64, boom. So now the ball is rebounding and going up. So all of that compressed energy is being expressed as acceleration out of the bounce. Now it is dispelled energy when it hit the ground, so it should not be rebounding at the same speed, right? So I'm going to take my scale for scale y, and let's see, I'm keeping an eye on it. 1.16, that's too little in there. 1.28, boom. Okay, cool, I'm happy with that. So 1.28, if that's the case, I got to subtract 28, so that means this should be 0.72, right? Now, I want to point out the timing at which I'm doing this, which is 2 frames after it left the ground, right? So there's a frame of it being squashed. The next frame is it leaving the ground. This is where it is transitioning from being squashed back into being stretched. So we want to leave. We don't want to put this stretch immediately after. We want to allow the eye to see this change from the squash back into the stretch, right? So again, now it's stretched. Make sure you do this little rotate to follow the arc of the path, right? And so when I say it's scooting on its butt, right? So look at my ball. We can see his face. He squishes and then rebounds the other way. So it's sort of going to be scooting on his butt as we do these. So once the ball gets up to the top, this is very easy. Very, very easy. Everything goes back to normal. And by normal, I mean the rotation is 0 and the scale is +1 for both. Just type them in. Easy. Because this is where the ball's physical forces are being equated, right? The acceleration is being matched by, the forces of gravity are being matched by the speed and the inertia and all that fun science stuff. So the physical forces are equalized at the top. So we set the rotation back to 0, scales back to +1s for both. And then we do it all over again. So here we are. We're falling back down. The frame before it hits the ground, so for me that's frame 29. You can always look at your translate keyframes if you're not sure which frame, right? So the frame before it hits. Boom. We're here. Scale tool. So in this case, it should be less than it was before. So I had it at 1.28. So 1.23. Maybe we'll go back to what it was before. 1.19. Okay. So this is going to be 0.81 then, right? If our math be mathing. And then give it that little rotational tweak, just a couple degrees so it's following the arc. Then we hit the ground. As we know, this is the compression of that same accelerated force. So we don't gotta guess. We already know. We just flip the numbers. If this is 0.81, this time it's not 2 periods, 0.19. This one, if it's the 1.19, this time it's the 0.81. Boom. Rotation back to 0. Boom. And then because we got to fix it before I move on, move the translate down, make sure it touches the ground. Very cool. Boom, boom. Stretch, squash. And then 2 frames out, we're stretching again. So, and again, we're shedding energy each time. Oh, I'm on the wrong. Whoopsie. Haha, make sure you're on the right peg. So we scaled this up 1.15. Yeah, that sounds fine. So if that's the case, then this needs to be 0.85. Correct? And then we rotate this ever so slightly. So there's our butt bounce. Boom, we go up. Butt bounce, we go up. And so here we are again at frame 36. And again, it doesn't get any easier than this. Rotate becomes 0. Scale becomes +1. No math required. Then we get here. Frame 42, it looks like. Yep. Again, about to hit the ground. So we know that means acceleration, which means stretching. So we really don't need to stretch too much more. We're kind of at our limit of how much stretching we can add because we've been shedding force. So honestly, I'm just gonna, okay, so we'll just do the same. 0.85, 0.15, boom. Rotated a smidgeon. Now we're at the ground. Second verse, same as the first, so we will flip these. 1.15, 0.85, boom. Make sure to 0 this out. And then I gotta fix this one, so make sure it touched the ground. And then this will probably be our last one, because we don't really need to worry about squash and stretch at a certain point. So here we are 2 frames after the fact. We really don't need that much squash and stretch for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and let's look for... Ah, damn it, I'm on the wrong peg again. T. So I'm going to go ahead and 1.11. Okay. So this will be 0.89, right? Boom. And then a little rotatos. Then we get to the top in 2 frames. Easy peasy. 0, 1, 1, boom. And then for old time's sake, we'll do this a little more. One more for old time's sake. Oops, not both. All right, 0.7. So that means this has got to be 93, right? Rotate. Boom. Oh, I was 1 frame off. That's fine. Move this forward 1 frame. There we go. There we go. Boom. Now we're hitting the ground. Okay, very good. Does keyframe everything? Why? Hold on. Alright, I'm just going to take these 3 keyframes and move them forward. There we go. Okay, I was like, don't be weird about it. Okay. Boom. So, as we know, invert our forces. 1.07. 0.93. No rotatos. Make sure it's touching the ground, which it basically is, but why not touch it up? And so here, I'm just going to go all the way straight to at the top of the bounce. You know how it goes. 1 and 1 and 0. And let's take a peek. So it gets low-key real squishy on the first one, but it's not that big a deal. It's just a little bit of our exaggeration. You can see how it really sploots out there at the end. But the rest of these bounces I think look fantastic. If I really wanted to be nitpicky, maybe I'd go back in here and turn down some of this acceleration. But I really don't think it's that bad. So yeah, we'll call that good on the squash and stretch. And I'm going to go ahead and throw one more quick pause in there for y'all. Okay, so let's finalize this. So our ball now bounces. It does a squash and a stretch. So now we must add our rotation. So for our rotation, very much like we did with the squash and stretch, rotation is going to work best when it has its own peg, so it does not have other keyframes interfering with it. So we are now going to staple a third parent peg between our ball and this time the squash and stretch peg. And this one is going to be our rotation peg. This is the rotatos. So I just want to make this clear so you understand sort of the order of operations that's happening with our pegs. Because these pegs are each controlling different things in a different order, right? So the first thing that happens, or will happen, is that this peg will control how our ball spins. Then our spinning ball will then be squashed and stretched. And then our spinning, squash, and stretching ball will be moved to the correct locations in time. So that's effectively what we have set up with our hierarchy. First it spins, then it squashes and stretches, then it moves. All of these things working in tandem. So with our rotation keyframe, simply, I'm going to set a keyframe on frame 1, and I'm going to go all the way out to the end, and I'm just going to spin. I put the pivot point on the ball. I'm going to spin this forward a bunch, as it will now spin the whole time it is bouncing. Although, did I spin it the wrong way? Oh, no, it's good. It's good. It's good. So, we've added our single keyframe at the end to spin it a bunch. You don't need to be technical. And then the big thing is you go back to the beginning, though, and just like we added our ease with our timing, our speed on the translate, we also want the rotation to drop off as the ball is bouncing less, when it has less angular momentum, right? So I am going to use my ease, and we want this to rapidly approach the ending. So we want to dispel speed as it goes, or it should dispel most of its speed at the end. So I'm going to choose one of these less insane, not this ease. I think I'm going to go with the middle one. And so now you'll see your ball spinning as it bounces, and then at the end it doesn't do it as much. I'm not as concerned about it. There are ways to control this. We could do it much more manually if we wanted to get nitpicky, but I don't want to. We just want to see it spinning as it goes. So if you're all done, you should have a peg that controls for the rotation, driven by a peg that controls its squash and stretch, alongside the timing for the translate. When you're all done, so my time goes out to 75, so I'm going to just close mine up at 80. So I'm going to move my red tab back to 80. Boom. So now my entire animation is 80 frames. Boom, 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 boom. And so to finalize this, to turn it in, I want to get rid of my reference now. So I'm going to turn off the little eyeballs on my ball bounce screenshot layer. And so this is where I would point out, by default, the background will be black. So if that's fine with you, then you don't need to do this next step. But if you want to change the background color, which I suggest that you do to have something neat, you add a color card. And so when you add this color card, it'll come in as a layer. And by default, it makes your background white. If you double click the little sun icon here, you will see this little box, which is the background color. When you click on it, you can choose a background color that is appropriate for whatever colors you have picked. Oh, I kind of like this. I kind of like this, like, mauve. I like this. It's cool. Okay, I'm going to keep that. Boom. Great. So now, if I play this, the yellow boxes are not real. They're just to show you you're selected on a color card. So you'll see if I click off, the yellow boxes go away. So I have a background. My screenshot is gone. And now I can go ahead and export this. If you leave the background image on, I will not be grading it, because you need to put these in your portfolio. So I do not want you to just have the reference image in the background of your nice finished ball bounce. So please just keep that in mind. Make sure you do this step where either you turn off the screenshot and or add a color card. So now I'm going to go to File, Export Movie. Boom. All this stuff should be good, right? And then we just hit Browse. Browse wants to know what we're naming it and where we're saving it. So I'll save mine in my documents again. Please include your last name, unless your name is hella long, in which case you can use your first name, because we don't have any duplicate names in here. So, so Meyer, and then this is ball bounce. Boom. In my documents, save. Okay, very good. And hit OK. So I'll go ahead and save this. And now, if I go to my documents, there it is. Bingo. And that is the file that you'll give me on Classroom. Thank you for watching.